Imagine a dark and cold night, where the wind whispers through the trees of a dense forest, carrying with it the murmur of ancient secrets. In the heart of this forest, hidden among the shadows and thick vegetation, stands an abandoned house. Built over a century ago, it now stands in ruins, with broken windows and doors that creak at the slightest touch of the wind. To the inhabitants of the nearby village, this house is more than just an old building. It is a place shrouded in mystery and superstition, avoided by all who know its stories. Four friends, Luke, Anna, Peter, and Claire, are driven by curiosity and the desire for adventure. They hear about the house in a local bar, where a mysterious old man tells scary stories about the place. "You shouldn't go there," he warns, with a serious look. "That house holds dark secrets. Everyone who has tried to uncover its mysteries has never been the same." But the young people, eager for excitement, decide to ignore the warning. Equipped with flashlights, cameras, and an indomitable spirit, they prepare to explore the house. The walk through the forest is long and winding. The path, covered with dry leaves and broken branches, seems endless. The silence is broken only by the sound of their own footsteps and the occasional hoot of an owl. When they finally reach the house, the scene is even more intimidating than they had imagined. The exterior walls are covered with vines, and the roof seems about to collapse. An aura of abandonment and despair surrounds the place. Upon entering, they are greeted by a strong smell of mold and rotting wood. The interior darkness is almost total, except for the beams of light from the flashlights dancing on the moss-covered walls. The furniture is covered with dust and cobwebs, as if no one had touched them in decades. Every step they take echoes through the empty hallways, creating an unsettling feeling that they are not alone. The friends begin to explore the house, splitting into pairs to cover more ground. Luke and Anna stay on the ground floor, while Peter and Claire climb the creaky stairs to the first floor. Luke and Anna find a main hall with a huge stone fireplace where remnants of ashes are still present, suggesting that someone had been there recently. They look at each other, intrigued and a little scared. Peter and Claire, on the other hand, find a series of bedrooms upstairs, all with signs of a life abruptly interrupted. Unmade beds, scattered clothes, children's toys left on the floor. But what catches their attention the most is an old diary that Claire finds in a bedside drawer. The pages, yellowed with time, are filled with detailed notes about the last days of a family that lived there. The diary reveals that the family consisted of a father, a mother, and 2 small children. The first entries talk about happy days, parties, and family gatherings, but as the pages progress, the tone of the notes becomes increasingly dark. The mother describes inexplicable events, strange noises at night, objects moving on their own, the feeling of being watched. She speaks of a malevolent presence that seems to be growing stronger every day. Luke and Anna, upon reuniting with Peter and Claire, listen intently to the reading of the diary. The atmosphere in the house seems to grow heavier as the somber words echo through the hallways. They decide to continue the exploration, now more determined to discover what happened to the family. In a living room on the ground floor, they find a family portrait. The painting, though faded by time, shows happy, smiling faces. But something in the eyes of the family seems strange, almost disturbing. Luke feels a chill down his spine as he looks at the portrait, as if the eyes are following him around the room. As they continue the exploration, strange occurrences begin to intensify. Claire swears she saw a shadow move down the hallway. Peter feels a cold hand touch his shoulder, but when he turns, there's no one there. Anna hears inaudible whispers that seem to come from all directions. The tension among the group grows, and fear begins to infiltrate their hearts. In one of the rooms, Luke finds a locked door leading to a basement. He calls his friends, and together they manage to break open the door, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. The hesitation is palpable, but curiosity wins over fear. With flashlights in hand, they descend one by one, feeling the temperature drop with each step. The basement is large and full of old boxes, furniture covered with sheets, and a strong smell of dampness. At the back of the basement, they find an improvised altar with spent candles and strange symbols drawn on the floor. In the center of the altar, there's an old porcelain doll with eyes that seem to look directly into their souls. The atmosphere is suffocating, and a sense of evil permeates the air. The tension reaches its peak when the candles on the altar light up on their own, illuminating the basement with a flickering, sinister light. The group huddles in a circle, feeling a malevolent presence around them. The walls seem to close in, and an icy cold envelops the environment. The shadows take shape, revealing faces distorted by pain and suffering. Suddenly, Luke is pulled back by an invisible force. He is dragged to the center of the altar, where the porcelain doll begins to move as if it were alive. The doll's eyes glow with a red light, and a deep, malevolent voice echoes through the basement, filling the friends with terror. "You dare to desecrate this sacred place," the voice whispers, reverberating off the stone walls. "Those who disturb my rest will pay with their souls." The friends try to rescue Luke, but are stopped by an invisible force that keeps them away. Desperate, they begin to recite the words found in the diary, hoping to break the curse haunting the house. As the words are spoken, the doll begins to tremble, and the red light in its eyes weakens. A spiritual battle unfolds in the basement, with the friends fighting against the malevolent force controlling the house. With courage and determination, they manage to free the trapped spirits, revealing the truth about what happened to the family. The father, consumed by madness, had made a pact with a malevolent entity, offering the souls of his family in exchange for power and wealth. But the pact went wrong, and they all ended up trapped in an eternal cycle of pain. With the spirits finally freed, the house begins to collapse. Luke is rescued, traumatized but alive. The friends run outside, leaving the building in ruins behind them. The forest, once oppressive, now seems a little less threatening as the first light of dawn begins to break the horizon. The young people return to the village, forever marked by the experience. They share their story with the villagers, who receive them with looks of disbelief and respect. The friends' courage in facing the unknown and freeing the tormented spirits becomes a local legend, passed down from generation to generation. For Luke, Anna, Peter, and Claire, life will never be the same again. They carry the physical and emotional scars of their encounter with the supernatural, but also a new understanding of the value of life and the dangers lurking in the shadows. Each of them follows different paths, but the bond forged that night remains unbreakable. The house, now in ruins, stands as a silent monument to the sacrifice and horror that occurred there. And although the spirits have been freed, the memory of what they faced endures, a grim reminder that not all mysteries should be unraveled. Story 2. The Whisper of the Lake. The air was dense with the promise of tranquility when Julia and Philip arrived at their destination, an isolated lake in the mountains. They were tired of the frantic city routine and needed a refuge, a place where they could reconnect and find peace. The lake, with its crystal-clear waters surrounded by lush forest, seemed perfect for this purpose. The lakeside cabin they rented was picturesque, with its rustic wooden facade and a cozy porch. They were prepared for a week of pure tranquility and romance. For the first few days, the cabin seemed to fulfill all its promises. They spent their days hiking the trails, picnicking by the lake, and stargazing on clear nights. Everything seemed perfect until the third night when they began to hear the whispers. They were sitting around a campfire, enjoying the crackling of the flames and the soft sound of the waves lapping the shore of the lake, when Julia frowned. "Did you hear that?" she asked, turning to Philip. He shook his head, a little distracted but attentive enough to notice the unease in her voice. "Hear what?" he replied, leaning closer. It sounded like someone whispering. She looked at the lake, her eyes narrowing as she tried to listen again. Philip shrugged, trying to dispel the discomfort. "It must be the wind or some night animal. We're in the middle of nature, after all." But the next night, the whispers returned, louder and clearer. Julia woke up in the middle of the night with a feeling of cold and a shiver down her spine. She looked around the room, but everything seemed normal. Except, of course, for the whispers that seemed to come from the lake. Philip woke up with her movement and frowned. "What is it now?" he murmured, still sleepy. "The whispers are back," she whispered back, trying not to sound alarmist. "They seem louder this time." He sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes. "Let's go outside and see," he said, more to calm himself than anything else. When they reached the shore of the lake, the whisper stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence. Julia looked at the water, feeling a strange unease. "This is really weird," she murmured. The next day, they decided to ask the locals about the lake. They stopped at the village's only grocery store, and while shopping, Julia mentioned the whispers to the owner, an elderly man with piercing eyes and a serious expression. He stopped what he was doing and looked at them intently. "You heard the whispers, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low and grave. Julia nodded. "Yes, we heard. Is it something common around here?" The old man sighed and nodded slowly. "Many years ago, a young woman named Isabel disappeared in the lake. She was known for her beauty and kindness, but one day, she just vanished. Some say she drowned, others believe she was taken by something in the depths of the lake. Since then, they say her spirit still haunts these waters, whispering her lament." Julia's eyes widened. "Are you saying the lake is haunted?" He shrugged. "Believe what you will, but many who came here have heard the whispers. Some tried to discover the truth, but no one succeeded. Be careful, both of you." Philip seemed skeptical, but Julia was deeply intrigued. The following nights brought even more disturbing whispers. They could clearly hear Isabel's voice, asking for help. "Help me," she said, her voice full of despair and sadness. Julia began to have dreams about the young woman, seeing her by the lake, her eyes full of pain. "I can't ignore this, Philip," Julia said one night after another disturbing dream. "She needs our help." Philip was reluctant. "What if it's dangerous? What if something happens to you?" "Something is already happening to us," she retorted. "What if it's true? What if we can help free her soul?" Finally, unable to ignore the whispers, Julia decided to return to the lake alone. Philip tried to stop her, but she was determined. She took a flashlight and walked to the shore of the lake, where the whispers were loudest. When she got there, she saw the spectral figure of Isabel again, floating above the water, her eyes pleading for help. "What do you want?" Julia asked, her voice trembling. Isabel did not respond with words. Instead, she pointed to the center of the lake, where the waters were deepest. Julia felt a chill down her spine, but knew what she had to do. She entered the water, feeling the cold penetrate to her bones. The water was calm, but each step seemed a challenge. As she advanced, Isabel became more visible, floating above the water like an ethereal mist. "Help me," the figure whispered, her words now clear and loaded with emotion. Julia continued, feeling the light current around her legs. Suddenly, she felt an invisible force pull her down. She fought against the panic, trying to surface, but something kept her trapped. In the midst of the despair, her hands touched something solid at the bottom of the lake. It was Isabel's body, bound by rusty chains. Julia used all her strength to break the chains, feeling the icy water around her. Each link of the chains seemed imbued with a malevolent energy, resisting her efforts. But she didn't give up. She felt Isabel's presence beside her, a mix of despair and hope. With a final effort, Julia managed to break the chains. She felt a wave of relief and gratitude envelop her, and Isabel's figure smiled before disappearing, her spirit finally freed. The water around her seemed to clear, as if the lake were purifying itself from the malevolent presence. Philip, who had followed Julia, found her by the lake, exhausted but alive. He hugged her, the relief evident in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. Julia nodded, still catching her breath. "She's free," she said with a tired smile. "Isabel is free." The next morning, the couple left the cabin, leaving the lake behind. But they carried with them the memory of Isabel and the certainty that the supernatural is more real than they had imagined. Back in the city, they reflected on their experience. Though the nights at the lake had been frightening, freeing Isabel's spirit left them with a sense of accomplishment. And whenever they remembered those disturbing whispers, they also remembered the strength of love and the courage to face the unknown. Julia and Philip realized the experience had brought them even closer. The connection they now had was deeper, forged by fear and overcoming something beyond human understanding. They decided to share their story with others, not to scare them, but to share the lesson they had learned about courage and compassion. The lake, now silent, held the memories of Isabel and the story of two brave lovers who, despite the fear, decided to free a tormented soul. And so, the legend of the Whisper of the Lake continued to be told, inspiring both fear and hope in future generations. Philip and Julia, whenever they remembered those days, felt a mix of fear and gratitude. They had faced something few would dare and came out stronger. And every time they heard whispers in the wind, they smiled, knowing Isabel was finally at peace. The lake became a place of reflection for them. They returned a few times, always with respect and reverence. They planted a small tree by the shore in memory of Isabel, a symbol of renewal and hope. And every time the tree swayed in the wind, they felt Isabel was thanking them, her presence now a harmonious part of the nature that once imprisoned her. The locals, knowing the story, also began to see the lake differently. The legend of the Whispers became a tale of courage and compassion, a reminder that even the most haunted places can find peace through acts of kindness. And so Julia and Philip continued their lives, more connected and at peace. They knew they had made a difference, not just for Isabel, but for everyone who heard their story. The Whisper of the Lake was no longer a symbol of fear, but of liberation and love. Story 3. The Doll's Curse. The Rodriguez family had moved to the small town of Oakwood in search of a peaceful life. The town, with its tree-lined streets and mild climate, seemed the perfect place to raise their 7-year-old daughter Sophie. Soon after settling in, they discovered a charming antique shop in the town center, filled with old and curious objects that sparked the imagination. Sophie, with her bright eyes of childlike curiosity, was fascinated by a porcelain doll she found on a shelf. The doll, dressed in an old lace dress, had blue glass eyes that seemed to follow every movement. "Daddy, can I take this doll home?" she asked, holding the doll carefully. Edward, her father, hesitated for a moment. There was something about the doll that bothered him, but Sophie's joy at holding it was irresistible. "Of course, my love. Let's take the doll home," he replied, trying to ignore the strange feeling. In the first few days, everything seemed normal. Sophie played with the doll and even gave it a name, Isabel. However, soon after, strange events began to happen. The doll appeared in different places in the house, even when no one had moved it. Edward and his wife, Mary, began to hear light footsteps at night, as if someone was walking around the house. One night, Edward woke up to a soft whisper at the foot of the bed. He opened his eyes, and in the dark, saw the silhouette of the doll at the door of the room. He felt a chill down his spine and quickly turned on the light, but the doll was not there. It must have been a dream, he thought, trying to calm his nerves. But deep down, he knew something was very wrong. Mary also began to notice strange things. She would wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling of being watched. Sophie started having frequent nightmares, and one night, she woke up screaming that the doll was trying to hurt her. "It was just a bad dream, darling," Mary said, but she couldn't help but feel a chill looking at the doll in the corner of the room. They decided to investigate the origin of the doll. They returned to the antique shop and questioned the owner, an elderly man with a mysterious air. "Ah, that doll," he began. "It has a dark history. It belonged to a girl named Beatrice, who lived here many years ago. They say Beatrice was a special child, but tragically, she and her family died in a fire. Since then, the doll has been passed from hand to hand, bringing bad luck to all who possessed it." Mary felt a shiver. "What should we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. The old man sighed. "You must return the doll to its resting place. There's an old abandoned chapel on the outskirts of town where Beatrice and her family are buried. Place the doll there and pray that Beatrice's spirit finds peace." That night, Edward and Mary discussed what to do. They were terrified of keeping the doll, but also feared what might happen if they tried to return it. They decided to follow the old man's advice and go to the abandoned chapel. The chapel was in a remote place, surrounded by ancient trees and an unsettling silence. Upon entering, the atmosphere was oppressive. The light from Edward's flashlight danced on the stone walls, revealing old inscriptions and religious symbols. At the altar, they found a small urn with Beatrice's name engraved. They placed the doll next to the urn and began to pray, their voices echoing in the empty chapel. Suddenly, they felt a presence around them. The temperature dropped sharply, and they heard indistinct whispers. The doll seemed to come to life, moving slightly. Edward continued to pray, his voice firm, while Mary held Sophie, trying to protect her from whatever was happening. Slowly, the feeling of evil began to dissipate. The whispers stopped, and the doll became motionless again. They felt a huge weight lifted from their shoulders. The family left the chapel, relieved but still shaken by what they had experienced. They returned home, and in the following days, peace finally returned. Sophie stopped having nightmares, and the strange events ceased. The doll, now in its resting place, would no longer torment them. The experience, however, left a lasting mark on the Rodriguez family. They knew they had faced something beyond human understanding, and that courage and unity were essential to overcome that challenge. The story of Beatrice's doll became a legend in the small town of Oakwood. The inhabitants murmured about the family who had the courage to face the curse and return the doll to its place. Edward and Mary, although relieved to have overcome the challenge, would never forget the doll's cold gaze and the oppressive feeling of the abandoned chapel. Despite the fear, the experience brought something positive to the family. They learned to value each other even more and face their fears together. Sophie, now free from nightmares, grew up knowing her parents would always be there to protect her, no matter how dark the threat. Life in Oakwood returned to normal, but the legend of Beatrice's doll continued to be told, passed down from generation to generation as a reminder of the mysteries and dangers that old objects can hide. And whenever someone passed by the abandoned chapel, a sense of respect and fear enveloped them, knowing that a spirit finally at peace rested there. But, as in all good horror stories, evil is never completely eradicated. Years later, another family moved to town and, attracted by the same antique shop, found Beatrice's doll, now out of its resting place. The story, it seems, was far from over. This new family, the Smiths, consisted of John, Mary, and their young son Paul. Mary, enchanted by the doll, bought it without knowing its history. From the moment the doll entered their house, strange events began to occur again. Paul, who had never had trouble sleeping, started waking up screaming in the middle of the night, talking about a girl watching him from the corner of the room. John, worried, decided to investigate the doll's history. He went to the local grocery store, where he found the same old man who had helped the Rodriguez family. "You are in danger," said the old man bluntly when John mentioned the doll. "That doll must be returned to its resting place in the chapel." The Rodriguez family tried to free the spirit, but it seems something went wrong. "You must do the same before it's too late." John returned home disturbed. He told Mary what he had discovered, and together they decided they needed to act quickly. They returned to the abandoned chapel, taking the doll with them. This time the chapel seemed even more oppressive, as if it were waiting for them. They placed the doll next to Beatrice's urn again and began to pray. The atmosphere became tense, and the doll, as before, seemed to come to life. The whispers echoed through the chapel walls, and the temperature dropped drastically. Paul, clinging to his mother, began to cry, saying the girl was angry. John, with a firm voice, continued to pray. He felt a presence beside him, a cold hand on his shoulder. He looked at Mary, but she was holding Paul. He felt a shiver, but did not stop praying. Finally, the whispers ceased, and the doll became motionless again. The malevolent presence seemed to disappear, and the chapel returned to a sepulchral silence. They returned home, hoping that this time the peace would be permanent. In the following days, there were no more strange events, and Paul went back to sleeping peacefully. The doll, now definitely in its resting place, seemed to no longer torment them. The Smith family felt a profound relief, but the experience left a lasting mark on them. The story of Beatrice's doll now had another chapter. The town of Oakwood continued to tell the legend, now with 2 examples of families who faced the curse and survived. But the doll, although seemingly dormant, was still there, a silent reminder that some old objects carried dark and dangerous secrets. And so, the small town lived in relative peace, but always with a watchful eye on the abandoned chapel and the antique shop. They knew the story could restart at any moment, that Beatrice's doll could be found again by someone unaware of its history. And when that happened, courage and unity would be tested again. For the Rodriguez and Smith families, the experience was a life lesson. They learned that love and courage are the best weapons against the unknown, and that, even in the most frightening situations, family unity can overcome any challenge. The doll, now at rest, served as a silent reminder of this truth. But in Oakwood, the nights were never completely quiet again. The wind whispered stories of old spirits, and the full moon cast shadows that danced as if alive. And always in the back of the minds of the inhabitants was the question, is the doll really at peace?